Good morning, everyone, and welcome to our March Legal Update webinar. My name's Poppy. I'm one of the consultants here at the Compliance People, and I'm joined for today's webinar by my colleagues Valentin and Tom. They'll introduce themselves later on when you meet them. If anyone experiences any technical difficulties, please post a message in the chat on Zoom, and a colleague will do their best to help. We have got plenty to cover today, so we will get stuck right in. You can see the agenda here for today's session. So I'm going to take you through various legal updates that we've seen over the past 6 months relating to environmental reporting, legislation relating to greenhouse gas emissions, including the UK and EU emissions trading schemes, or ETS. We'll take you through environmental legislation around construction, and then some updates to various F-gas related legislation as well. And then at that point, Valentin will take over and run through the remaining key topics. After this, we have got an On the Horizon section, during which we'll have a look at potential upcoming legislation based on recent consultations and publications that we've seen that we think may have an impact. It should take us around 45 minutes to an hour to go through the legal updates and On the Horizon sections. And then to finish off, we will do a live Q&A session. So if you do have any questions throughout the webinar while we're talking, please post these in the Q&A feature on Zoom, and Tom will lead us through these questions, and he'll be monitoring them as they come through. We will, of course, try and answer as many of these live, but rest assured, if we don't get to your question during this session, we will be taking the remaining questions away with us and sending out an email afterwards within the next week or so containing responses to those questions. Just a quick reminder for our subscribers that you do also have the helpline service available. So any questions you might have around the legislation that we go through today, you can use that function to help understand how it might apply to your organisation. And we would also just like to remind everyone that you can subscribe to free monthly newsletters through the website, and there's plenty of free articles on there as well to explore, which just dig into the key pieces a bit deeper. Let's get into it then with some recent legal updates. So we will start off by talking about some of the recent changes to reporting requirements and what that could mean for companies, as well as the current state of play with fossil fuel powered boiler grants. So having a think about the Companies Act of 2006, a recent update has come through on this. The Companies Act defines the different thresholds for small, medium and large companies in the UK, as we can see here. These thresholds determine annual reporting requirements. So small companies are not required to do annual reports, so financial reports. Medium companies must produce financial reports. And then large companies must produce financial reports that also include some sustainability related information. So the update that was published in December has actually updated the thresholds. So this determines whether a company is small, medium or large. As we can see in the table, there's quite a big jump for those categories. So to meet the new size thresholds, a company has to meet at least 2 of the 3 thresholds, those being turnover, balance sheet and employees, in both the current and the previous financial year. So these updated thresholds apply for financial years starting on or after the 6th of April this year. And what this is going to mean for a lot of companies is a shift in that size categorization. So changes mainly reduced reporting requirements for a lot. So it's really worth reviewing these updated thresholds to determine if this will impact you and your reporting requirements. And then thinking about boiler upgrade schemes now. So governments put in place funds and grants like this to facilitate energy efficiency improvements like boiler upgrades, because the installation of more efficient heating systems not only saves energy and reduces greenhouse gas emissions, but it also saves money on energy bills. So across the various jurisdictions that we look at, there are government mechanisms in place to help people install low carbon, also referred to as clean heating systems. We're also seeing schemes which support gas and oil boiler installations coming to an end. So thinking about first the England and Wales boiler upgrade scheme. So this allows grants for eligible domestic and small non-domestic buildings to have heat pumps or biomass boilers installed. The scheme in its current form will run until the end of 2027. and has recently had its budget increased to help the UK in its transition to a low carbon economy. This scheme no longer applies to Northern Ireland, but there are some local schemes available there. And then in Scotland, the Home Energy Scotland Grant and Loan Scheme is available to applicable domestic properties for homeowners. The grants apply to clean heating systems, again, like heat pumps and biomass boilers. And then for the Republic of Ireland, the Sustainable Energy Authority of Ireland's Better Energy Home Scheme is in place for homeowners and landlords of domestic properties, again, providing grants for the installation of low carbon heating systems. There are various other local schemes across the UK and Republic of Ireland to support in this transition to low carbon heating, but what we can clearly see from these schemes is that there's a pattern or a shift towards the encouragement of low carbon heating systems in homes. Now, we've got a few pieces to talk through relating to greenhouse gas emissions and the various mechanisms in place to help tackle emissions reductions, starting with the UK ETS. So if you are subscribed to us, it's likely you'll have seen these come through in your monthly updates, but we're just going to dig a little bit deeper into them now. So starting with the UK ETS, or Emissions Trading Scheme, this applies to certain regulated activities, as we call them. So this is things like mineral oil production, production of cardboard and paper, and glass and ceramic production, to name just a few. There's a lot in that list. Organisations which conduct any of the regulated activities, these are listed in Schedule 2 of the 2020 order, must be part of the UK ETS. So the 2020 order requires organisations to monitor and report on greenhouse gas emissions each year, and they must surrender the equivalent greenhouse gas emissions allowances, with one allowance equaling 1 tonne of carbon dioxide equivalent. So we've had 3 updates come through around UK ETS over the last few months. The first reduced the number of greenhouse gas emissions allowances and the number of these which is made available for free allocation. It also created a flexible reserve of allowances to be used to top up free allocations for current installations. The next update now requires operators which are permanently stopping operations to notify the relevant regulator so that these free allocations that were associated with that operation can be returned and recalculated. And then last month, they also made a change to the free allocation period in order to align with CBAM. So 2026 is now actually a standalone scheme year, and the second allocation period is now 2027 to 2030. Now we're going to have a look at the equivalent essentially for Ireland. So as with the UK scheme, these regulations apply to certain regulated activities. The principles are largely the same as the UK scheme that we just talked about, but these regulations, the European Community's Greenhouse Gas Emissions Trading Regulations 2024, apply the EU ETS scheme to the Republic of Ireland. And now CBAM. CBAM imposes carbon prices on the import of carbon-intensive products into the EU. So these products include cement, iron and steel, aluminium, fertilisers, electricity. Again, just to name a few, there's many. The aim of CBAM is to apply a fair price on the carbon emitted during the production of these carbon-intensive goods. So those captured by the regulations have to submit an application to become an authorised CBAM declarant. Once authorised, declarants have to submit a declaration relating to the previous year, and this is from 2027 onwards. These declarations have to contain information like total quantity of goods imported, the total embedded or embodied emissions of said goods, and the total number of the corresponding CBAM certificates to be surrendered. These regulations came out in October, and they bring into force the requirements set out in EU CBAM for the Republic of Ireland. So again, bringing it into force in Ireland. And now we're going to think about construction, starting with the harmonised rules for construction product marketing. So we can see here manufacturers, importers, distributors, fulfillment service providers, and online marketplaces that are involved with construction products that are covered by harmonised technical specification or those that are CE marked based on a European technical assessment, have various duties for products placed on the EU market. And the aim of this is all to comply with environmental performance and safety requirements. So the duties or compliance with them apply from January next year, January 2026. And the regulation that this will eventually repeal, which is 305-2011, had previously focused solely on safety. So what this regulation does is it introduces requirements relating to a product's environmental performance over its life cycle, as well as still considering the safety aspects. Declarations of product performance and conformity that are included as one of the duties for manufacturers have to cover the environmental essential characteristics that are listed in Annex 2 of this regulation on the slide. Some of these characteristics are things like fossil fuels, land use, and water use. And then just an update on the Planning and Development Act 2024 for the Republic of Ireland. Several parts of this act were commenced in December through a small update. So the highlights of this are that the Planning Board is now the named commission as referred to in the act, and various definitions were put in place for the purposes of interpretation. There are likely to be further regulations published relating to this act over coming months. And then thinking about EUDR, so back in 2023, the EU's Deforestation Regulation, or EUDR, was published. It establishes rules for various commodities and products such as cattle, cocoa, coffee, rubber, wood, which are placed on the EU market or exported from the EU. And the aim of this is to minimise the EU's contribution to deforestation. Duties are imposed on operators and traders to comply with the due diligence and information systems put in place to help regulate the selling and export of the captured products. In December, the date of the application for EUDR was postponed, and it is now the 30th of December 2025, so this year rather than last year. Thinking a little bit about listed building and conservation area consent. So supplementing the Historic Environment Wales Act of 2023, these regulations introduce additional rules and procedures relating to listed building consent and conservation area consent in Wales. So those applying for listed building or conservation area consent must follow the new rules set out in these regulations. And then looking at assessments of environmental sustainability. So Regulation 305/2011 lays down harmonised conditions for the marketing of construction products. This includes requirements to assess and verify sustainability performance. So an amendment in October took sort of current knowledge of the situation and updated Annex 5 to include the assessment and verification of constancy performance system 3+, a mouthful, which will help ensure manufacturers are able to assess the essential characteristics relating to the sustainability of construction products. Now, there have been a few updates recently and additions to the legislation around F-gases, which we'll run you through now. So the first one, looking at certification requirements for people that perform works on equipment containing F-gas. So this regulation lists out a series of certificates which must be held by anyone carrying out work on equipment containing F-gases or fluorinated greenhouse gases. These works include carrying out leak checks, installation, repair and maintenance, servicing, decommissioning, and the recovery of any gases within that equipment. So just a couple of examples of equipment that might contain F-gases are stationary refrigeration units, stationary aircon units or heat pump equipment, and refrigeration units in trucks as well. Just a note as well that these certification requirements set out in this regulation also apply to alternative substances like ammonia, carbon dioxide, and hydrocarbons. And then we've had two updates to Regulation 2024/573. So the first defined clear requirements for labelling products and equipment which contain F-gases. The second one related to hydrofluorocarbons or HFCs, which are a class of F-gas. And this update included reference values for producers and importers who place HFCs on the EU market. So those reference values are set out, and they're set out for the period from January 2025 to December 2026. So I'm now going to pass you over to my colleague Valentin, who's going to run through the next chunk of legal updates for you.
Thank you, Poppy. And good morning, everyone. My name is Valentin, and I'm one of the internal consultants here at the Compliance People. We will now move on to the next part of the legal updates, starting with recent changes to waste legislation. And we start with the Producer Responsibility Obligations, Packaging and Packaging Waste Regulations 2024, which introduced the extended producer responsibility for packaging in the UK. The regulations consolidate and expand the current obligations for packaging and packaging waste. They replace and revoke a wide set of UK legislation on packaging and packaging waste, some with immediate effect and some from 1st of January 2026. Under PEPR, producers of packaging in the UK must register and report data on packaging supplied and pay fees to contribute towards the processing of packaging waste. They can do this This can be done directly or through a registered compliance scheme. Charities are exempt from packaging and packaging waste obligations, and also exempt are certain categories of packaging, including reused packaging, exported packaging, and packaging covered by a deposit scheme. The scheme administrator for the UK's PEPR program is PAC UK, which is responsible for its delivery across the 4 UK nations. Moving to the next slide, we're looking at producer classification, their classification and key duties. Producers of packaging are those established in the UK and who supply packaging as a brand owner, packer filler, importer or first UK owner, distributor, online marketplace operator, service provider, or a seller. These producers are classified into 2 categories. A small producer is one which has an annual turnover greater than £1 million in a financial year, and who produces more than 25 tons of packaging in a calendar year. A large producer is one which has an annual turnover greater than £2 million and who produces more than 50 tons of packaging in a calendar year. Important to note that the threshold criteria is met for a relevant year, where the turnover threshold was met in the financial year that ended before 7th of April in the previous year, and the volume threshold was met in the year before that. This sounds a bit confusing, but to give you an example, a producer would be classed as a large producer, say for 2026, if they turned over more than 2 million in 2025, in the financial year ending before 7th April 2025, and if they produced more than 50 tons of packaging in 2024. Moving to key duties, large and small producers are both required to register with and report packaging data to the relevant agency in their jurisdiction. They must also keep records of packaging data and meet recycling obligations and provide evidence of it to the regulator. Additionally, large producers must also assess the recyclability of household packaging they supply, keep records of assessments and report it to the relevant agency, and, of course, pay annual disposal and administration fees to the scheme administrator. In terms of frequency of reporting, large producers must report twice a year by 1st of April for the period from 1st of July to 31st of December in the previous year, and by 1st of October for the period from 1st of January to 30th of June in the respective year. Small producers, on the other hand, are only required to report annually by 1st of April for the previous calendar year. Next, we look at Regulation EU 2025-40 on packaging and packaging waste, which sets new requirements for packaging placed on the EU market. Producers of packaging and those who make it available on the EU market will need to ensure that packaging meets specific sustainability and labeling requirements. The regulation sets out duties for economic operators, which will apply from 12th of August 2026. So no duties for economic operators until August 2026. Requirements are also established for the extended producer responsibility and packaging waste prevention, including duties for member states. Economic operators must keep records of packaging they place on the market for 5 years for single-use packaging and for 10 years for reusable packaging. Important to note, upon request from surveillance authorities, all economic operators must provide the identity of economic operators which supply them or which they supplied with packaging or packaged products. This regulation amends previous EU regulations and directives and repeals Directive 94/62/EC on packaging and packaging waste from August 2026, although certain requirements under the directive will continue to apply until end of December of 2029. Next, we have a new deposit and return scheme introduced from England and Northern Ireland by the Deposit Scheme for Drinks Containers, England and Northern Ireland Regulations 2025. So from 1st of October, this scheme will be in operation from 1st of October 2027. From that date, a refundable deposit must be charged for certain single-use drink containers. Duties are placed on producers, suppliers, and retailers in relation to charging of fees, charging or refunding deposit fees, and in relation to operation of return points. The scheme applies to single-use containers with a capacity between 150 milliliters and 3 liters, and which are made of aluminum, steel, or PET plastic. The scheme does not apply to single-use containers. The scheme does not apply to containers which are not single-use or which are made of high-density polyethylene. Good example would be milk bottles. Those are made of this material. Also, containers used for liquid medicines, flavor enhancers, or sweeteners are also excluded from the scheme. The scheme will be administered by a deposit management organization, which will act as a scheme administrator. According to the current guidance, this deposit management organization should be appointed in April this year. Its key responsibilities include to provide guidance to businesses, to register scheme participants and set fees for registration, issue scheme logos and return codes, set deposit values, including for eligible items from other schemes, keep registers of registered scheme participants, collection points, and exemptions, arrange collection and recycling of in-scope materials, pay refunds to scheme collectors, and also achieve set collection targets. We are now looking at key duties of producers and retailers on the next slide. A producer is a manufacturer of in-scope drinks, an importer of drinks into the UK, or someone who fill and seal drink containers to order, such as hospitality venues. The main duties of producers are to be registered with the DMO by 1st of October 2027. Producer fees that will need to be paid will be based on the number of containers placed on the market. They also need to label drink containers with the required item logo, packaging logo, where applicable, and scheme return codes. They must also apply the deposit to all containers included in the scheme, pay deposits collected to the DMO when containers are sold to the next business in the supply chain, report the number of drinks placed on the market, and keep records for a period of 7 years. Next, the scheme provides an exemption for low volume products. The scheme provides a low volume exemption for products with product lines of less than 5,000 units per year. But for the first year, this is 6,250. These are 6,250 units for the first year. Producers and importers of low volume products will still need to register with the DMO and report the number of containers placed on the market. However, they won't need to pay producer fees, apply deposits, or carry scheme labeling for any of those products. Moving to retailers, all retailers selling drinks included in the scheme must pay the deposit to producers or wholesalers when purchasing the drinks, charge the deposit to consumers at the point of sale, and display clearly and visible information about the scheme. Return points. Supermarkets, grocery stores, convenience stores, and news agents that sell drinks in the scheme must host a return point for drinks containers unless they are exempt. An exemption applies for retailers in urban areas which have a retail space of less than 100 square meters. So retailers in urban areas with a retail space of less than 100 square meters are not required to operate a return point. Also, another sort of exemption is for certain premises to opt out of charging the deposit. Those who sell drinks for immediate consumption on the premises, such as cafes, restaurants, and pubs, can choose not to charge the deposit for those specific products only. However, they must still display clear information stating that they are an opt-out premises and ask customers to leave their empty containers before leaving the premises. Moving to the next slide, we have another couple of updates to waste legislation. First one is a ban on single-use vapes, which prohibits the sale and supply of single-use vapes in the entire UK from 1st of June 2025. Next, we have an update to the simpler recycling regime. The Separation of Waste England Regulations 2025 introduced 2 exemptions in relation to the simpler recycling rules, which are due to come into force on 31st of March 2025. The first of these exemptions allows waste collection authorities and waste collectors to collect plastic, glass, and metal altogether without the need for a written statement. The second exemption delays the application of the new waste separation rules for micro businesses, this being businesses with less than 10 employees, until 31st of March 2027. Finally, as a reminder, from 31st of March 2025, waste collection authorities and other waste collectors must collect certain recyclable waste streams. These are paper and card, plastic, metal, glass, and food waste from relevant non-domestic premises and business and from businesses separately from other waste streams. Important to remember that the law, however, provides some flexibility for waste collectors. So, as a minimum, general waste, food waste, and dry recyclables should be collected separately from each other. Another update is made to the landfill levy in Ireland. The exemption for construction and demolition waste from the landfill levy is removed. The levy for the disposal of construction and demolition waste and other similar waste is now the same as the waste recovery levy, which currently is at 10 euros per ton. This amendment also makes a clarification regarding the liability for mixed loads, where waste is accepted for disposal, and that waste consists of both material which is subject to the landfill levy and material which is exempt from the levy. The levy will be payable for the entire amount to be for the entire quantity to be disposed of, unless the separate waste can be clearly identified and quantified. The next amendment is to international shipments of waste, and this required that prior informed consent PIC procedure is now required for both imports and exports of hazardous and non-hazardous waste electrical equipment. Moving to the next topic, harmful substances. We have a number of updates to the persistent organic pollutants regulations. Annex 1 is updated to lower the maximum limits accepted for two substances, which names, unfortunately, I'm unable to pronounce, so I won't. Also, I want to provide a reminder that following the listing of PFOAs, the sale of aqueous film-forming foams extinguishers containing these substances has been prohibited in the UK in 2020. So the reminder is that existing stocks can only be used until 4th of July this year, and only if releases are controlled. Use is not allowed for training purposes, however. The next update relates to labeling of substances. Several modifications are made to Regulation 1272-2008 on classification, labeling, and packaging of substances and mixture, or the CLP regulation. Annex 6, harmonized classification and labeling for certain hazardous substances is updated. Due to the significant number of changes, and to allow sufficient time for suppliers to adapt, these changes will only apply from 1st of May 2026, so next year. Also, duties for manufacturer, importer, distributor, and downstream user duties are updated in relation with reporting information relating to emergency health response, establishing acute toxicity estimates, labeling substances and mixtures, and in relation to providing refill stations. Moving to the next topic, we look at some updates to harmonized standards for personal protective equipment. These amendments are all made to decision 2023-941 on harmonized standards for personal protective equipment, to include additional harmonized standards for personal equipment, respiratory protective devices, protective clothing, footwear, electrically insulated helmets, and personal eye protection. Also, outdated versions had been removed and replaced with updated standards for earmuffs with safety-related audio input, entertainment audio earmuffs, earplugs with safety-related audio input, entertainment audio earplugs, and seat harnesses. Next, we look at some updates to driving certificate of professional competencies applicable to the entire of UK. So the vehicle driver's certificates of professional competence regulations 2007 are amended to define separate requirements for international drivers and national drivers in relation to training for the driver CPC certificate. National drivers are still required to complete the 35 hours periodic training every 5 years, but they are now allowed to complete training courses which last a minimum of 3.5 hours instead of 7 hours as international drivers. They can also attend training over non-consecutive days, and they can also complete e-learning only training up to a maximum of 12 hours instead of 7, towards the total of 35 hours of training required. Training requirements are also eased for certain returning drivers looking to regain their CPCs. From 1st of February 2025, a driver whose CPC has expired within the last 2 years is no longer required to undertake the whole 35 hours of CPC training before they can regain their CPC certificate. They can instead complete a new 7-hour return to driving training module, after which they are allowed to start driving AGVs. However, that will be valid for 1 year, during which the driver must complete the additional 28 hours of additional training. Next, we look at some changes related to product safety. And we're starting with the European General Product Safety Regulations 2024, which essential rules on the safety of consumer products placed or made available on the EU market are established by this regulation. Specific obligations are set out for economic operators to ensure that only safe products are placed on the market. The regulations also provide powers for authorized officers to issue notices and to take enforcement action for products which are not safe or compliant. The regulation implements Regulation EU 2023-988 on general product safety, also known as the 2023 regulations, and it replaces and revokes the previous version of the General Product Safety Regs, which was the European Union General Product Safety Regulations 2004. Products in conformity with the 2004 regulations, which were placed or made available on the market before 13th of December 2024, may continue to be made available on the market. Under this updated new regulation, there are some key duties for economic operators. Manufacturers, authorized representatives, and importers or providers of an online marketplace must ensure that information required under the 2023 regs is provided in English, and they are also required to comply with any notices or enforcement action taken by authorized officers. And next we have an update to product safety related to non-road mobile machinery, where we have Regulation EU 2025-14, which sets out requirements for economic operators to ensure machinery, non-road mobile machinery, is EU type approved or individually approved, and that it conforms with safety requirements. Legislation covering the approval and market surveillance of non-mobile machinery is also added to the list of Union harmonization legislation in Annex 1 to Regulation EU 19-1020 on market surveillance and compliance of products. So these were the updates relating product safety. I will now pass it on back to Poppy for an overview of potential changes on the horizon.
Thank you very much, Valentin. Hello, everyone, again. I'm going to start by talking about a recent Welsh Government consultation. It is actually still open now until the 16th of April. This is around their first timber industrial strategy. So managing forests sustainably where they are being used for timber production helps to reduce carbon emissions, which is why Wales is looking to introduce a strategy. The overarching aims of the proposed strategy are to offer a wide range of employment opportunities within the sector, as well as building a stock of sustainable housing, and to boost Wales's progress towards decarbonisation. The government is aiming to publish their timber industrial strategy later this year, which will be informed by the responses to this consultation. And then a recent consultation on the UK ETS. So there was a cap and trade system introduced on greenhouse gases that could be emitted by certain industry sectors like energy producers, energy intensive industries, and aviation. At the minute, free allocations are received by certain sectors to help reduce the risk of carbon leakage. Carbon leakage can occur when businesses transfer production to other countries which might have less sort of strict emissions constraints. So the UK ETS Authority have just closed on a consultation regarding proposed improvements to the free allocations approach. So if this decision is made to go ahead with the proposed changes, this would impact the allocation period that begins in 2027. And then we've had a few recent consultations around zero emissions vehicles, so we'll tackle them together. The first one that we'll think about is a recently closed one by the Department for Transport in the UK. And this looked for feedback on a proposal to reduce the regulatory burdens for businesses which operate zero emissions vans, so making it easier. The UK government has also recently consulted on ending the sale of new cars which are powered solely by petrol or diesel. This is proposed from 2030 onwards to support the UK's transition to zero emissions vehicles. And the last one we'll think about is the Welsh Government has recently consulted on changing building regulations so that electric vehicle charging points are included in developments which include car parking. So this would apply to both new residential and non-residential buildings, as well as buildings which are undergoing major renovations or significant changes in use type. So a little bit on the infrastructure as well. And then the EU Omnibus. You may have heard this phrase over the last couple of weeks. I know I've seen it everywhere. The European Commission has very recently put forward a package of proposals aimed to simplify previously published EU legislation, so CSRD, EU taxonomy, CSDDD, and EU CBAM. The aim of these proposed changes is to reduce the burden on organisations through postponement, changes to the thresholds which relate to reporting requirements, and reduce mandatory data points as well. And then we will look at reforms to the energy performance of buildings regime. So for England and Wales, a recent consultation asked for views on proposed changes to energy performance certificates or EPCs. It also looked at changes to display energy certificates and air conditioning inspection reports as well. The aim of this was to improve the accessibility of building performance data as well as the quality of the certificates themselves. And then thinking about the pollutant release and transfer register. So this is a database providing information around potentially hazardous chemical substances and pollutants from industrial sites. So DEFRA, or the Department for Environment, Food and Rural Affairs, consulted in December on the UK's implementation of the Pollutant Release and Transfer Register. And then some proposed updated fire prevention and mitigation plan guidance. So Natural Resources Wales consulted on proposed updates to the guidance for fire prevention and mitigation measures, specific to permitted waste facilities. So changes were proposed to storage times and guidance around storage itself. So, for example, there's a provision in there that shipping containers shouldn't be stacked. And then thinking about climate change agreements. So back in 2023, the UK government ran a consultation looking for views on policy proposals for a new 6-year climate change agreement scheme. This included changes to eligibility criteria, reporting requirements, and the target setting process. So the government response to the results of this consultation sort of affirms the introduction of a new climate change agreement scheme expected to start in 2026. The new scheme would include targets to the end of 2030 and would provide the same reduced climate change levy rates for those meeting their obligations, and this would be until March 2033. There have been sort of whispers recently about changes to various things around waste. So the first one we'll look at is changes to carriers, brokers and dealers. So there was a government response to a 2022 consultation which proposed changes to the waste carriers, brokers and dealers regime. The changes proposed would result in the introduction of terms waste controller, waste transporter and combined waste controller transporter, and we would lose the terms carriers, dealers and brokers. The changes would also replace the 2-tier registration system with the introduction of 3 different permits relating back to those new terms. So the waste controller only permit, the waste transport only permit, and the waste controller and transporter permit. As of yet, we're still without a date for these changes, so something to just be aware of and keep an eye out for. And finally, proposed changes to waste exemption. So for England and Wales, a consultation back in 2023, and then a more recent one earlier this year, proposed new fees for waste exemption registrations. These new fees would help generate an income to ensure that waste exemptions are being effectively inspected and are not being misused. These changes are due to come into force in April this year, but we don't have a date yet. So again, something to be aware of and keep an eye out for. Now, I'm going to pass you over to my colleague, Tom, who's going to guide us through some of the questions that we've had over the course of this webinar.
Thank you very much, Poppy. As Poppy said, I'm Tom. I'm also here a consultant at the Compliance People. We are now going to be moving on to the live Q&A section of the webinar. We've had lots of questions come through in the chat. We're going to try and get through as many of them as we can. Unfortunately, we won't be able to get through all of them due to time constraints, but any questions that we are unable to answer now, we will answer offline, and then copies of all the answers will be sent to all attendees. So let me have a look here. We have had a few questions around whether, the slide decks and the webinar itself, the recordings of the webinar will be available. PDFs of the slide will be sent out to all attendees as well as a recording of the webinar. So you don't need to worry about that. And let's have a look at what questions have come through. So we have one here around company thresholds. So this one says, will we still count as a large company if we have over 250 employees? So this really depends around the other thresholds that have been changed. So from the look of your question, you have over 250 employees. So this means that you will still satisfy that threshold for a large company because that threshold is unchanged. It was 250 or more before, and the new threshold is still 250 or more employees. But the other thresholds are changing, so you do need to check these. So for example, the turnover threshold is increasing from, to 54 million pounds from 36 million pounds, quite a jump. And again, the balance sheet is increasing from 18 million pounds to 27 million pounds. Again, another big jump. So it is important to check these thresholds, as It may change your reporting requirements, for example, if because of the increases in the threshold, you do drop into, for example, a medium, the medium category for a company. And then that will affect things like whether you're required to report under SECA, including energy usage and emissions on your annual reports, that sort of thing. So it is important to check whether the changes to the thresholds do change what you're categorized as an organization. So yeah, that answer, that one really depends on the new thresholds that come in April, and it is important to check that. We have a question here. Any indication the UK will apply CBAM principles in the future? So the government is planning to implement a UK CBAM from 2027, I believe is the date that is currently locked in. Is it this, the UK CBAM will be intended to place a carbon price on the most emission intensive industrial goods coming into the UK, very similar to how it works in the EU. So sectors that would be affected, things like aluminium, cement, fertilizer, hydrogen, iron, steel, these sort of sectors. The exact sectors, as far as we know, that will be covered do differ slightly from the European Union version of CBAM. We're not entirely sure at the moment, being, a couple of years out. We're not exactly sure how they're going to interact with each other at the moment. So it is, something to keep an eye on. But yes, there is plans for the UK to introduce a carbon border adjustment mechanism within the UK. We have had a few questions around AFFF extinguishers and containing PFOAs and whether you would need to get rid of them or whether you can still use them. So before the 4th of July, which is the deadline here when the ban comes into place, so before the 4th of July this year, you can still use firefighting equipment containing PFOAs, for their intended use on your site. They can also be used for testing purposes as long as any foam released can be contained. However, extinguishers using this type of foam, they cannot be used for training purposes. And it's also important to note that if you do still have this equipment, AFFF containing PFOAs on site, that you really need to start looking into getting them replaced as soon as possible. This is because after the 4th deadline, the 4th of July, the use of PFOAs, PFOA-based, fire suppression systems will be, illegal, and the requirements around the disposal of the PFOA foams also due to become stricter. So acting before this deadline is quite key into making sure that you're ready for these changes. I think it was mentioned that it's potentially quite expensive, but yeah, it is something that needs to be looked at before this happens. Let's have a look here. We have one around the deposit return scheme. Will online retailers be exempt from collection of containers under the new DRS? So as far as I'm aware, and Poppy and Valentin, please jump in if you know any more up-to-date information around this. Products sold online are not exempt from the deposit return scheme. If you do sell relevant products online, I believe you can register with the Deposit Management Organization as a take-back service provider, meaning you can recover empty containers from online customers at the point of delivery, and then to refund the deposit that was charged to the customer. Let's see if I can get another one in here before passing over to the others. We've got one around CPCs, so certificates of professional competence for drivers. If a CPC has expired, can we use the fast track training to renew the CPC? So I think this one is referring to the new return to driving training module that has been available since February of this year. So as long as the previous CPC or certificate of professional competence expired within the previous 2 years, this new training module would be available to the driver. It allows the driver to take a 7-hour course rather than the 35 hours of training normally required, allowing the driver to drive professionally within the UK for a year after only that 7-hour course. It just makes it a lot easier for drivers that have dropped out of the profession to get back into the profession. The driver can then choose to complete a further 28 hours of training over that year after their 7-hour course. When they are driving again, they can choose to do a further 28 hours of training to obtain a CPC that is valid for the full 5 years. So yeah, it is useful for getting professional drivers that have had their CPCs recently expire back on the road, and then they can choose to invest that extra 28 hours if they want to get the full 5 years certificate of professional competence. I'll pass it over now to see if any of the other two presenters have any other questions that they've seen that they want to answer now. As I said, any ones that we don't get to will be responded to. Just that will be emailed out to everyone. So Poppy, have you got any questions that you've seen that you would like to respond to?
Yes, thank you, Tom, for that. I have seen a couple. I'll just do one at a time. So, we had a question around construction products. So someone's not quite sure what the construction products covered actually are. Great question. Very fair. So I think this is in reference to regulation EU 2024-3110, and this lays down harmonised rules for the marketing of construction products. So in this case, or in this context, when we say construction products, we quite simply just mean any items that are, as it says in the legislation, permanently incorporated into construction works. So this is things like windows, doors, and plasterboard are a few examples. Hopefully that helps, but feel free to put a further question in and we'll respond to it afterwards. Valentin, do you have any you'd like to respond to?
Yes, I also have a few that I made a note of. Okay. So first, I have a question regarding the DRS scheme. Are there any known plans for glass bottles and containers to be included in the future? So at the moment, as mentioned during the presentation, they are not included, and there are no plans to include the glass bottles as part of the DRS scheme. Also, as mentioned earlier, the deposit management organization will be appointed supposedly next month, and they are expected to produce more guidance about future plans for implementation. Another one, does simpler recycling apply to temporary site offices on construction sites? The answer to this one, I would say, is yes, as simpler recycling rules apply to all workplaces, and the site office on a construction site, even if temporary, would still qualify as a workplace. So I hope this answers the question. The next one is asking about registration for the DRS scheme. Can I register now as a producer under the deposit and return scheme? Well, the regulations require producers to register with the deposit management organization before 1st of October 2027, when the scheme actually comes into operation. At the moment, unfortunately, you cannot register, as the deposit management organization is still to be appointed. According to the current government guidance, as stated in one of the previous questions, this will happen in April this year, and probably more guidance on the period for registrations will follow. I have another one here. This one is on simpler recycling. My waste contractor wants me to separate waste, but it's different on how our sister organization has been told to separate their waste. Do we still have to do it in the way they ask us to? I would say yes. As mentioned during the presentation, the legislation allows some flexibility for waste collectors, including for combined collections of some recyclable streams. For this reason, the separation requirements for customers can vary slightly amongst different waste collectors. Important to remember here, as a minimum, waste collectors must make separate collections for general waste, food waste, and dry recyclables. But anything extra, as I said, can be different from collector to collector. Yeah, I'm still looking through some other questions. Any of you guys
Yeah.
have another questions that you might want to answer?
Yeah, I've just seen a nice quick one I can take. So we've had a question around ETS. So someone's asked, what do you mean by standalone scheme year? Do I have to do anything new? Great question. So the 2026 standalone scheme year is to be treated as an extension of the first allocation period that ran 2021 to 2025. So quite simply, there are no new or additional requirements for the 2020 scheme year, just as it was. So that's nice and simple.
Okay. How about you, Tom? Do you have another one? Meanwhile, I have one about
I do, but yes, if you want to do what you can do your one, and then
let me do one. My first, it's about the packaging compliance related to packaging to compliance schemes for producer for PEPR. If I'm part of a packaging compliance scheme, do I need to do anything else? Well, the role of compliance schemes is indeed to help organizations to meet the EPR requirements. But these schemes can pay registration fees, can fulfill the reporting requirements, get PRNs or PERNs to meet recycling obligations. But they cannot register the organization on the service, and they cannot also make waste management payments on an organization's behalf. So the answer is yes. You will still have some responsibilities, even if you are part of a compliance scheme. And then I have another interesting one on simpler recycling, asking, hey, is there any de minimis for food and glass waste collections? Our stores would produce virtually none of either of this. This is a question that we receive quite often, especially around food waste, through our helpline service. As it stands at the moment, there are some minimum thresholds that apply in relation to food waste collections in Wales. So an exemption is granted for quantities of less than 5 kilograms per week. And there are also some exemptions for certain businesses applicable in Wales and Northern Ireland. For England, however, at the moment, as far as we're aware, there are no exemption for low quantities of food waste. I hope this answers your question. Yeah, that's back to you, Tom.
Yeah, no worries. Just a quick one that I saw come in around. So I think not knowing whether a fire extinguisher link into the question I answered around PFOAs and fire extinguishers, not knowing if you have PFOAs. So within a fire extinguisher, if you've checked, all the documentation, check, safety data sheet, and you're still not unsure, I would just recommend contacting again to contact with the manufacturer, just because it is important to know whether they do contain them because of this. I was about to say impending ban. It sounds a bit ominous, but yes, about the ban that is going to be coming in. So yeah. Has anybody, have either of you two got any others that you've seen that you want to answer now?
No, I think the rest link quite well together. So best to take them on together.
Yeah, no worries at all. I was just like to remind everyone that if your question hasn't been answered in the live session here, we will get the answers out to you. And if you haven't answered a question, that's absolutely fine, because you will also receive copies of the answers to all the questions, because a question you was going to ask might well have already been asked and answered. So yes, that's it for this month's Legal Update webinar. Big thank you to Poppy and Valentin for presenting the webinar for us today. I do hope everyone found it useful. Thanks a lot for dialing in and watching. There will be a short survey. If you could complete that, it would be greatly appreciated. It helps us to, shape future sessions and include the information that you want to know about in these webinars. And if you do need any information about the compliance people, you can find our website at thecompliancepeople.co.uk. We offer services such as on-site consultancy and auditing, as well as providing legal registers and updates. So do feel free to get into contact if you would like to know more about those. And other than that, thank you all for attending. We wish you all the best for the rest of the week, and goodbye.